Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Min and I'm your co-host with Heather from our office, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Heather, hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Min.
Today we bring to our podcast a bit of a sad situation about the NDIS. We're covering two topics here. One is the article that was released by the ABC News on the 28th of September about the title is called "People with Disabilities Are Being Trafficked for Their NDIS Funding," Insiders says. And this coincides with a recent publication of the Royal
Commission into people with a disability.
Which has been 5 years in the making.
Yes, that's right.
So let's talk about this whole situation, Heather. You watched the video. You've seen what the Commission is all about. Give us your 2 cents worth about the whole topic.
Thank you, Min. I watched the Four Corners report and was alarmed, although not surprised with the findings. Also interesting that Four Corners, that particular story was publicly funded, so they had a GoFundMe campaign. So I did think that was unusual. It was a very well researched and very, very upsetting documentary for those that did watch, and I think it was really essential viewing for anyone that's works in the NDIS space. Things that were particularly alarming is how vulnerable people are, particularly people with any kind of mental disability, really being held captive by their carer. And in this instance, people living in group homes, and whilst we might not think group homes are the greatest solution, people in there are comfortable, they know who they're with. And what's continually concerning about every story I hear about disabled people is their lack of agency. And timing-wise, perfect timing that this story should come out just before the final report was handed down. And I think the Commission did an amazing job on the final report. I have read the full report in detail. But the issues that were brought up in the Four Corners story need addressing, and every issue that was brought up needs addressing. The thing that was obvious to me, and I think to you, Min, as well, was how can you get away with this kind of behaviour within the realms of the NDIS? So the NDIS is a reasonably new discipline, and whilst it's something that we know needs to happen, it's getting now to the point where there needs to be more structure, more robustness about who can become a carer. What does it take to become a carer? You need more than just an ABN to decide that you can go and call yourself a carer. So how do we start looking at more structure, what that might look like? And I think these are the questions that we need to raise in this podcast. So I'll hand it back to you.
I'm going to read a few paragraphs here, Heather, and then you can comment afterwards. So this is the article from the ABC News, which was based off the 1 hour video segment, which you could all watch on ABC View channel if you want on the app. Let me read this word for word. Nurse Linda Carafili remembers getting the call from her client. He was absolutely desperate. The man who had a history of severe mental health issues had been coerced to move from a boarding house with support services to a house in outer Melbourne, away from everyone he knew. He was frightened of staying, but he was also frightened of leaving because, in his words, he was like, "I'm too old to be homeless. If I leave here, I have nowhere else to go." So he was really trapped. He'd been promised great food, caring support workers, but instead residents were sometimes left alone and told to defrost frozen sandwiches for their meals. Linda had to rescue him. When you trick someone to go somewhere and you get them there and their feeling is that they actually cannot leave, to my mind, that's abduction. This exploitation of people living with disabilities means hundreds are missing in the system. The NDIS regulator doesn't know where they are or who's looking after them, and authorities can't monitor their welfare. Now, Heather, in that show on ABC, when the reporter confronted the commissioner, the representative of the NDIS, and she said, there are people missing in the system, why don't you find out where they are? Because they're in trouble. And her response was, well, people are allowed their choice of control, so therefore they can be where they want to go, and we have no power to do anything otherwise. Which was a weird way of saying we care, but we don't care, we're not going to do anything about it because they're allowed to go do what they want.
My opinion is that there's a 3-tier problem here, and at the top is the NDIS Commission, at the bottom are the participants, and there's a big fat layer in the middle, and it's that fat layer in the middle that is managing to just bleed the system dry without any kind of control. So whilst, yes, NDIS participants certainly have a choice, there should be some way of monitoring, counselling every person that is getting NDIS funding to make sure that they are safe, that they're getting what they need to get. So how can someone in the middle, how can a provider come along and have the authority to take that person from where they were and place it somewhere else without getting some form signed, agreement signed, stat dec, whatever? So there's no traceability.
Well, I don't know how the paperwork goes, Heather, but let me just give you the bare facts of numbers here. There are 160,000 unregistered providers in Australia. 160,000 unregistered. There are 20,000 registered providers, SIL providers. And there are 1,600 SDA providers. The average number of participants per provider is 5 across those registered and unregistered providers. It is very easy to become an unregistered provider because they're not being monitored and audited properly like registered providers. And it's also very easy to become a carer. All you need to become a carer is an ABN. No police check, no blue card, no CPR first aid qualifications, no NDIS worker screeners tests, nothing. Zip. Anyone can be a carer, a freelance, self-employed contractor carer. And a lot of these, I assume, unregistered providers would be hiring these freelance contractor carers. So if the commission, the agency, is not monitoring these unregistered providers, and they're not monitoring these so-called, I'm not saying unregistered or unregistered support workers, anything can go on in the background there. If someone says to another person who's a participant in a group house, come over to our house over here, we'll give you lots of lollies and pizzas and watch TV every night and do whatever you want, just sign this form to move over here, then that's it. It's done. They're signing off on it because they're allowed their choice control to do what they want. And it's easy to be manipulated by someone who has sinister reasons. And in this article here, it says, let me read this to you. A cottage industry has emerged where NDIS providers can convince vulnerable people to sign up with them and then lure them away to live in rented accommodation. They can then take their NDIS funding, which is sometimes worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, and provide few services, if any, in return. The potential of each package means that you get to put together a group of people. You've potentially got millions of dollars a year just with 4 or 5 people.
That is fraud right there. So,
of course it is, yeah.
That needs to be plugged immediately. That needs to be fixed. And we need to have much more robust process for registering carers. I mean, I have to get a blue card to teach yoga. I can't walk into a yoga studio without first aid, a blue card, a this, a that, a that, a that. But you can register to be a carer without any of those things. And you're looking after the most vulnerable parts of our population. So that hopefully with the disability report coming down, that these things will start to be investigated under a microscope. And the other thing was the phasing out of group homes. So, and I know that you will definitely have a lot of thought about how this will improve the scenarios by phasing out group homes and putting people into much higher standard SDA housing, that surely this must improve that situation. But how are they getting through the cracks of it? Basically, they're putting them up in slums. You know, they're renting houses and putting vulnerable people into houses that are not, it's not SDA housing. It's any kind of slum. It's like Slumdog Millionaire all over again. Slum housing. So horrendous. And like anything, shine a spotlight on it. There's something you can do about it. But this is fraud. It's fraud under the, you know, the auspices of caring for somebody.
Well, the words are here, is human trafficking.
Yeah, human trafficking.
You're trafficking that person for financial gain.
Yes, in plain sight.
Yep. And let me continue reading some comments here. Tricked and trapped. Once people move from these houses, they often get lost in the system. Linda, the nurse, likened these providers to sharks that circle these people looking for who they can pick off. These operators treat people like cash cows. The more stock they have, the more NDIS taxpayers' revenue they're bringing in. The nurses also have told Four Corners that several people have been abducted from these boarding houses in the middle of the night. Linda and these other nurses say years of warnings to the NDIS regulators have gone nowhere. The NDIS Quality and Safeguards Commission, who is responsible for ensuring people with disabilities on the scheme are safe from abuse and neglect, and it doesn't know where everyone on the scheme lives. So there you go. We're not keeping tabs on the individual decision-making of where someone might choose to live. That's their excuse for, you know, not having responsibility on the whereabouts of these missing participants. I want to tell you a story that Brendan Wolf, one of our staff members, he told me at his house one day. He read an article about a support worker who was looking after a participant who also became the participant's plan manager and then became his support coordinator and then moved the participant into her house and then became her landlord, his landlord. And as a consequence of this total control over his life, being a landlord, support coordinator, plan manager, and support worker, she drains the entire NDIS funding.
Does that mean that she's got 4 streams of income from that one person?
Yes, in her house. And when she depleted his funding, she kicked him out on the street, homeless. And then when other people tried to step in, they couldn't help him because he had no funding to be left used to be taken on by other care providers. So there's just so much abuse in the system, financial abuse in the system, where people are getting away with almost murder here. And this is the reason why this article came out about a week prior to the release of the Commission's report. And that was 5 years in the making too, Heather.
There's a quote here. This is absolutely part of their right that they don't know. We don't know where everyone is in the system. And in fact, at the forefront of what we do at the Commission is the rights of people with a disability, making sure that we uphold and respect those rights. Correct. But upholding and respecting their rights also means upholding and respect their rights to be treated well and not to be trafficked. So whilst you're respecting their rights at one level, you're certainly not respecting their rights at another level. So that statement is very overarching. There's not enough detail in that about everyone who is being funded should be some kind of accountability that somewhere someone knows who's getting NDIS funding. Therefore, it's not that hard to expand that to understand where are they living, what circumstances are they living under, are they happy with who they're living with? So, and then we go on to the next story, living in a hellhole. People like Jamie Culhane are also at the mercy of the NDIS providers. He counts the months he lived at the Sydenham Grace SRS in 2021 as some of the worst in his life. It was like living in a hellhole. It was a bad place to live. I went through hell in that place. The 56-year-old, who has schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, lived in the facility with 16 other people, many of whom were on the NDIS. He said the accommodation was filthy, there wasn't enough food. The layout is like cells, one cell after another. There was a big padlock on the door with a chain so thick and massive you're locked up, you're in prison. I'm sure this was not the intention when the NDIS was rolled out.
I'm just shocked to see that there are people in Australia doing this to vulnerable, disabled people, treating it like a prison. Literally padlocked cells, room by room by room as a cell, as an actual prisoner, and milking them for every dollar they can get out of them as per the NDIS system. And unfortunately, the NDIA doesn't have enough resources to crack down and chase down the bad guys here.
So in this instance, it says, the Victorian government closed down Sydenham Grace. The boarding house provider said they were closed down over allegations. So I'm sure that every one that's closed down, there's another 20 popping up in their place.
Exactly. It's too easy to become a provider.
Too easy.
So, we're bringing this to the attention of our listeners on this podcast to say, go watch this episode on Four Corners, ABC, iView. Read the online article. If you get a chance, read the 220 recommendations in the Royal Commission here. Because abuse within the NDIS, both financial, physical, sexual abuse, is rampant throughout this cottage. This is a cottage industry, let's be honest. It only began 5 years ago. So, we really hope that more providers are doing the right thing by their participants, and more carers do the right thing by working for legitimate organisations. And there should be more whistleblowers coming out to dob on the employers if they're doing wrong things by their participants. I've spoken to other people who are carers and who told me that their bosses were rorting the system as well. I've spoken to someone in my family who works in the NDIS for a provider, a large not-for-profit organisation, and she said when their organisation goes to visit other providers, care providers who work with their organisation, they rock up and see 5 Porsches in the driveway. It's pretty obvious that they're rorting the system, It's just sad to see that people are rorting the NDIS. And I think 20% of the $40 billion a year is because of red tape and fraud and illegitimate claims. And let's be honest, this is money that could have gone to the participants, right? And it's sad. Back to what we talk about, which is SDA. Here is the NDIS fighting SDA participants to give them the rightful opportunity for SDA funding, but yet the NDIS is not fighting the fraudsters and the criminal gangs who are rorting the system of billions of dollars every year. The NDIS should play their resources more properly against the wrong people. That's my opinion. But it's a government system, all bureaucratic red tape everywhere, and hopefully with this Royal Commission that we as people in this Australian society have become more aware of who's doing what and doing the right thing, Heather. That's all I can say.
With anything new, isn't it sad that the government comes up with something that is overdue, was looked at across the world as something important and brave, and that when it's rolled out, the first people to take advantage of it, like you said, are the cottage industries that start to spring up. So what is that? Why, it's like vulnerable people and other people flock to it like it's a honeypot. So there needs to be red tape, certainly, but red tape in the right areas, not red tape in the wrong areas. Not red tape preventing people getting housing, but red tape preventing people ripping off the system.
Look at this here. This paragraph says it all. The NDIS Commission has the power to ban and fine providers, but those powers are rarely used. Last year, it banned 92 operators out of 167,000, and it issued only 11 infringement notices. That's it. the NDIA is a toothless tiger. Let's be honest. It's a shame, but it is what it is. 16,305 complaints last year to the NDIS. And as per the episode we saw on TV there, Heather, families of these participants complain to the NDIA, the commission, the agency, and they say, sorry, the participants are allowed to do what they want. And we spoke to the provider in that 10-minute phone call, and everyone's all good. Everyone's happy. We don't see a problem with it. And then here are the families saying, oh my God, we've complained for you for months on end, and you've made the decision after a 10-minute phone call with somebody on another line without checking. This is the government, you know.
It's wrong. It needs fixing. And I always like to be on the optimistic side that something will come out of the Royal Commission, and the government has promised, Bill Shorten did promise, to carefully investigate all 220 findings that come down. So we will be following that closely.
In the next week or so, we'll have Brendan, one of our staff member. He'll also give his feedback on the Royal Commission report as well. And that's from a participant's perspective. I mean, we are outsiders here, Heather. I mean, we're not vulnerable here. We can only judge from a distance. But when people are disabled and vulnerable and have no support, a lot of people have no support, no families, it's hard for them to even cry out for help. You know, how can you cry for help when your carer takes away your phone and your email and your iPad? Who do you ring for help? You can't. You know? I mean, if you ring the cops, they're going to say, well, it's not our business, it's the NDIS business. If you ring the NDIS for help, then they're like, please hold, transferring you somewhere next.
There's almost a naivety that giving someone the opportunity to have a carer and all these different levels of hope, you know, being looked after, it's so easy just to work against them as well as work with them. So you could be very lucky and find a great carer and someone that's really there to look after you. But from what we see and what we evidence-based is that more often than not, it's not happening like that at all.
It's very easy for this cottage industry to bring in support workers without real training and real technical knowledge. It's very easy to become a support worker without any credentials. It's very easy to set up a unregistered provider business without registering to the NDIS. And with these kind of gaps, it's so easy for people with ill intentions to take advantage of people who have no idea what's going on. And it's a shame and it's painful to watch. But we can only hope that through this report, the NDIA and all the stakeholders around Australia who are aware of these problems and these abuses step up to the plate to do their best to clean up this cottage industry. And then we can only hope and pray that things get much more better for anyone out there who is in one of these predicaments. Any final words, Heather, before we wrap up this session?
Only to second what you've just said, that hopefully the more this is put out to the public, the more the public can see what's going on, the more light shone on what is potentially a horrendous situation, then improvements can be made. I am heartened by Bill Shorten's wrap-up statement. It's unacceptable if complaints have been received that are not resulting in appropriate action being taken. Minister for the NDIS, Bill Shorten, said in a statement that any case studies like these, whether historical or new, are upsetting, deeply concerning and unacceptable. After 10 years of neglect, our mission is to build back trust by putting Australians with a disability back into the centre of the scheme. And that's what we hope happens.
Mm. Well, Heather, thank you so much for your input, and we hope that our listeners have enjoyed this episode. And we will put a link to the actual video that's on ABC iView app for you, our listeners, to watch yourself. It's a 1-hour show on Four Corners to watch, And, it's much more of impact of watching the actual episode on TV rather than listening to this episode. So please put the time out to watch it and be aware of what's going on out there in the NDIS community. Thank you, Heather.
Thank you, Min.
Bye-bye.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.